We're here to make accounting interesting.
Oh.
Ian, I have to start with you because I think triple entry accounting started with you anyways. Could you give a brief history, just so the crowd understands, what is single entry, double entry, and triple entry?
Okay, to correct that, it didn't start with me, but I was there and did the interpretation, if you like. Single entry is just what we would do as ordinary people doing some sums. We'd just make a list, and there'd be a line item for everything we count up, and we might sum it down the bottom, and that's how much money we've got, or that's how many goods we have. Double entry is an amazing thing. What it does is it takes that single entry and divides it into two, one of which is liabilities and one of which is assets, and these match each other. And the amazing thing about double entry is that if you make a mistake in one of those, then it gets caught in the other, because they no longer match. And if you arrange all of these into two sides and two books and so forth, you end up with a magic thing called the balance sheet equation. You know, I should really defer to the accountant here on this one, but I'll keep going. And the balance sheet equation says that all of the entries on the left must add up to all the entries on the right. So we have a built-in redundancy mechanism. And this actually enabled, depending on one's school of thought, it enabled an explosion of trade because it took the accounts from the family. Accounting being a very important thing because it tells you where the money is, it could only be done by a trusted member of the family. But once you got double entry accounting, you could have a profession called accountants to come in and interpret the values that are going on in the business. And that person did not need to be a member of the family, which meant this was, if you like, the enabling thing that took the Italian seafaring industry from the family operations to the large combines. Now you could take the money and put it into a department, and you're no longer bound by how many children you had. So hence, the trading empires just shot up in size in the times of the double entry. The first recorded time is about 1299, and then Pacioli came along and documented it in 1470s, thereabouts, yeah. And then for the next, what would that be, 550 years, double entry basically dominated. But sometime around the 90s, we got the confluence of several factors, one of which was cryptography, another of which was the internet, of course, and databases and the understanding of data storage and so forth. And that allowed us to do what we called a very reliable record. It was signed, and it was in data, and therefore we could move to the next thing, which is adding protocols. Two parties doing a trade could negotiate what the trade would be. And if they did it in advance and created a single record, that single record could be held by both of them, and it was guaranteed, because it was signed and hashed, it could be guaranteed to be the same record. Now, there's a trick here. If I lose my record, and you're the only one with the record, you can now play against me. You can change it. So we needed a third party to stamp and hold that record. And then this was done. We built systems. Todd Boyle, who basically coined the term and did all the theoretical work, he half built a system. I built a digital cash system, which turned out to be this. But then blockchain came along, Bitcoin came along, and it was literally a triple entry system, which therefore has opened up the interest of a lot of people. So that's the quick history, I think.
That is. So the proof of work is the third entrant. Is that accurate?
The blockchain sitting in the middle that uses proof of work to decide what is in the block, that is the third party, yes. And of course, we're dealing with conceptual things here. So you draw a big circle around it and you say that is the third party, even though we know it's 1,000 miners.
Right. Fascinating. Juan, I read your paper. And I don't read a lot of accounting white papers, but it was fascinating to see your view on it about 20 years later from, or about 15 years later from the paper which Ian co-wrote. And you mentioned very specifically the change address in Bitcoin being a representation of that third entrant, and the third entrant responding back and giving back to the first two. So the return of change. I have to ask, in your opinion, are you viewing a specific blockchain? Because I believe your paper is from 2015, which was a very different era in blockchain. So looking today at BSV or in a very scalable UTXO-based blockchain, is that the sort of solution that you were envisioning?
So to make something clear, I think that the third entry in my understanding on how this works is the community adoption of the longest chain of blocks, the mining process, and the miner's validation all together. And the change address, what it does, it introduces a way for there to be a second entry, which is the signature of the payee, because it allows for a signature of the payee in the act of later becoming a payer to sign off on the amount that he has received. And then you have, of course, the first entry, which is the entry of the payer. That's easy. That's a public-private key pair. So I was not thinking of a particular blockchain, but the first blockchain that came to mind was Bitcoin, and I was trying to study how Bitcoin was a use case and an example of triple entry accounting. As it turns out, it is one such use case. Now, I ended up in my research drawing up a distinction between triple entry bookkeeping and triple entry accounting, because there is such a distinction between bookkeeping and accounting themselves. With bookkeeping being the recording of the books, the keeping of the books, and accounting being the sort of intellectual process that consists of the transformation and the processing of that information. And now with Bitcoin, we have a division, right, of forks within Bitcoin. So there's Bitcoin Core, Bitcoin Satoshi Vision. And as it turns out, I think that Bitcoin Core and other forks perhaps are just focusing on the bookkeeping side. But if you want to have the full thing that triple entry accounting enables, which is a reliable shared record, but also an accounting software on top of that, you need your blockchain to be smart contract permitting. So BSV is one of these examples. In that case, so for that reason, I think it fits in very well with what I have been studying.
Fascinating. One of the things that stood out too is how Ethereum didn't qualify for various reasons. And so would any account-based blockchain be an option for that, or must it be UTXO-based?
Ian can also give his opinion on that. In my view, if you have a UTXO-based blockchain, you do have triple entry bookkeeping. So the core thing with triple entry bookkeeping is that you are building a shared record through signed messages. In the case of Ethereum, you can build an app that resembles this, but it's not necessarily triple entry bookkeeping. So you can build it with it, but it's not necessarily the case.
I understand. And these ethereal conversations about such things, this is fascinating to hear the conversation go from, hey, what a great idea, we're going to revolutionize economics. But then the rubber really has to hit the road with a business, and somebody needs to create software and sell it to the real economy, because otherwise we're all just jabbering about theory. So, Torje, from Addendum, you guys have created a real-world application of this theory, truly validating the work of both men here, but I'm quite curious to hear. Please showcase what you've got. Tell us about Addendum.
Yeah, so my background is from auditing, and at the time I came across the papers from these gentlemen, and of course the white paper. And I was reading a lot of Dr. Wright's blog, and something needs to be built here. So yeah, right now we have an MVP. So I'm very fortunate to work together with an amazing team and try to make actually a viable business, a commercial product of triple entry accounting. So that's a very, very interesting journey that has just started. So like Ian explained and Juan explained, today we have accounting in just when the records go into a single database. So we want to allow companies to very easily make the third entry into the blockchain. It's very important that it's easy for business to adopt it, to try it. So we allow them to extend their ledger, and then we want to let them have their counterparties to very easily verify their transaction. So you would have the concept of the signed receipt or the signed invoice on the BSV ledger that you choose to use. So that's on a transactional level, and when we want to cater to a business that is used to look at a financial statement, we want to make a really low barrier for them to use it. So that's why the first thing we're looking at also is a dashboard that illustrates how basically you can see, okay, how much of my extended accounting onto the blockchain have been verified by a third party. Now, and this is very fascinating from an auditing perspective, because this is going continuously. So we can start to look into continuous audits, and even before starting an audit, you can have a picture of okay, how much resources is needed, because you see now there's a lot of audit evidence potentially here. And speaking of audit evidence, I came across papers mentioning that the biggest hurdle to have this adoption is regulatory uncertainty. So, and that makes sense. It's a very conservative, auditing and accounting is a conservative industry, and a lot of good reason for that. Yeah. So we are now in the sandbox, the fintech sandbox with the Norwegian regulator. And we are now then going through the technology and the audit, okay, if we have audit evidence here on the blockchain, look at that, how sure, auditors can dare to touch it and use it as audit evidence. Yeah. So that's a very important first step.
I have to ask, what is the size of the opportunity if you were to look at global accounting, basically based on fraud or I guess just incompetence? Is there a dollar figure that you could put on the opportunity for Abendum? Oh,
so there's so many use cases. You mentioned cybersecurity, and like we have seen the rise of fake invoices. Yeah. And what we hope to have is also this can be a very, very easily implemented internal control against this kind of fraud. So it's important that it's easily implemented, because then it actually gets done. The internal control gets done. This happens to a lot of big companies and small companies, and it's very costly to retrieve the funds. So this is a very important aspect of actually what we're looking into, because it has to be commercialized. So it has to be a product that it makes sense to buy it and use it as triple entry. So that's an advantage. For the audit purpose, it can hopefully increase the quality of the audit evidence, and that can make the audits more efficient and better. So, yeah.
What do you think, and any of you gentlemen can jump in, what do you think are the biggest challenges to getting the accounting industry specifically to jump in, give these things a try? It seems like the kind of thing you can't sort of dip your toe into. You're going to have to just sort of adopt a thing and make a bunch of big changes.
So yeah, it is a big ask. The accounting and auditing industry is very conservative, and they will not move if you ask them to move. It's not going to happen. There's two possible ways that this could happen, and one is going through the regulator, perhaps via a sandbox or whatever process. If you can explain to the regulators what this does, and they can see the benefit, they can start to nudge the auditors and the accountants in that direction. That's one way. The second way is it has to be a developer-led thing, in the sense that there are opportunities out there for certain processes to use this idea of triple entry, which will provide a much stronger base of evidence, and therefore will allow you to do much more. Yeah. Because many systems are basically pyramided on the strength of the evidence that you have. And if the evidence is weak, you have a weak system. You know, you can think of Tether, for example. What's the evidence there for their reserves? Nobody knows.
Yeah, some graphs.
And everybody's very worried about that. But if you were to have a strong base of evidence there would be much more confidence in the product that's on top, and you could start building more and more things on top of that. Developers can find that and can do that in small scale, different opportunities. And that's the way I would advise it to be pursued.
Sure. Juan, anything to add on that front?
So, as they said, accounting is a conservative profession, perhaps for good reasons. So, I think that I think accountants, they are not going to change just because a new idea has come to the board. it has to be demanded on the side of companies, and companies are going to demand it if they see products that are going to provide gains to them. So actually, there's a lot of weight in the shoulders of Torje there. But yeah, so I think here, so one of the keys are the potential gains, and as Ian was saying, there needs to be evidence for that as well. Another key, it's a reasonable transitional adoption of this technology. So for a company to adopt triple entry accounting, they need to know that they are going to reap benefits out of it, without the need for all their partners to do it at the same time. That's like an impossible leap. So they need to already collect intermediate benefits from that. And while I think triple entry accounting has the potential to completely replace double entry accounting, in practical terms, that is probably a very bad idea. You want to keep the world very similar for companies, for accountants, and just make it more reliable to facilitate the transition. So you can let them keep the double entry device while there is a triple entry grounding for the record.
Do you want to outline your idea?
First also, I like to also zoom out to take a big picture of where we're coming from and where we're going. So in sense of going from the single entry to the double entry, if you look at it from the perspective of data and information, you went from having a little and bad information to having much more information and much more data and much better information, being able to measure profit, for example. And we can observe the same movement today, in the sense of there's a change. There's a change that now there's a lot of data, it's unstructured data and needs to be moved to structured data. Now we have lots of data silos and we need to increase transparency. And we have low integrity of the data and we need to increase the integrity. So that's a kind of a big picture trend, that reason why businesses should be really looking into triple entry accounting together with three market forces, if you could say. There's a very simple economic market force, then you have complexity is going up. To get the tasks done, it gets more expensive. At the same time, in big parts of the world, you have aging demographics. So automation is really needed. And the triple entry accounting can both automate accounting and a lot of the auditing work also. We have the social market force. There's a higher demand for good ESG reporting. This is a good tool to have good integrity data on the ESG reporting. Yeah. And we see that the ESG reporting it's falling into the hands of the accountants. So it's kind of natural.
For the sake of the audience, can you describe what is ESG accounting?
Yeah, environmental, social, and governance.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the last market force is maybe the most interesting, and that's why we're here. It's the technology we see. It's very recent. Now we have a blockchain that truly scales and you can build on and really use as a data management platform. So yeah.
You mentioned transparency, and we were just talking about what are our big blockers going to be. I think the thing that people ask me the most is, how am I going to put my company's data on a public blockchain to create transparency, but also protect my business's privacy for all kinds of reasons, both regulatory and also competitive market, that sort of thing. So what is that balance of what is private and what is public in this scenario?
From a technical point of view, the easy way to do that is you share you create your records with your counterparty, and then you timestamp it with a hash and put the hash on the blockchain. So you've committed yourself to that particular record, but nobody else can see what that record is. And there are different ways in which you can employ, so for example, Todd Boyle constructed the world of shared transaction repositories, which were commercial businesses which would hold that third-party record. So there's lots of different ways to do it. And we need to back away from this sort of knee-jerk reaction that says, oh, we have a blockchain, we must shove everything on there. No, we have a blockchain, we must use it for the hard parts of the puzzle. Sure. And most of the stuff we keep private. And that kind of solves the problem. We should also be careful to dive into exotic cryptography like zero-knowledge proofs and so forth, because they're very new, they're very scary, and you can risk a complete class break there if you get it wrong. And that has happened. That has happened.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So basically, don't overuse the tool for the sake of using the tool.
There's two things going on here. The blockchain is a triple entry system. And then there's the question which Ibanez is looking at, how do I build a triple entry system for accounting purposes, and do I put it on the blockchain?
Sure.
There's two things going on here. So then the blockchain just becomes a tool, amongst many other tools.
So when you were theorizing this, was a blockchain-like system in your mind, or was this something that just sort of happened to come about a few years later?
No, not at all. And triple entry itself is, it doesn't require blockchain. We just require some sense of an honest central player, a trusted third party, we used to call them. The blockchain does a little bit more in that direction, but it's not the be-all and end-all for this particular area. There are many trusted players out there. So, for example, if we were a set of banks and we wanted to do TEA, triple entry, we could quite happily use the central bank as a trusted third party, because we have to trust the central bank. We have no choice. So let's use them.
Sure.
So.
Fascinating. And so what are the baby steps that we can take toward, if I was a business development expert or something, and if I didn't really care about all the tech and the theory, how do you go about trying to sell this to the real world economy? How do we make this real?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about every day before I go to bed. It's interesting that we are actually we're looking into external confirmations, because it's actually not a coincidence. There is a business that has been trying to do that in Norway already. So it seems like there's a market for it, and as an auditor, I used it, and I think that was a very interesting service. By using triple entry accounting, we can it's a different process, and it's less steps. So it's more automation friendly.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Is it otherwise a competitive industry? Are there other businesses looking into this, or is it a little bit out of scope for other accounting tech firms?
Juan has been doing a fair bit of research on this, forthcoming paper on use cases, and he's had a lot of success talking to, Walmart Canada, who've used it for their supply chain. Perhaps you could say something about that.
Please.
Well, yeah, we have been doing some research. So our research has like sort of three branches: the historical, genealogical part of it, where we're studying the influences of and from triple entry accounting. Then the conceptual, taxonomical part of what is triple entry accounting, what is triple about it, what's accounting, and then the empirical part, which is the most important one, whether it works, right? And in this case, what we're doing is studying existing accounting practices, pain points in them, and how the companies are trying to address them. And for that, we're kind of surveying as we can the different use cases. So Abbendum is the first one actually that I know of in the BSV space. That's why I'm super interested in it. But yeah, for instance, Walmart was doing something very, very similar in Canada with a company known as DLT Labs. And something in this use case and in others, and also relevant to selling this, is that it's amazing when you start looking at it, how most of existing accounting practices are kind of entirely focused around containing the problems that the problems and negative effects of discrepancies in redundant data. So discrepancies in redundant data, they give you delayed payments, overpayments, underpayments. With that, two redundant records, they are supposed to be the same. But in practice, what you get is, these discrepancies that when between two different departments of a company or between two different companies, you need to go to a reconciliation process and spend resources on that. Then you need to go perhaps to dispute resolution, then even to judicial process. And meanwhile, you're losing time. So you need to refinance your invoices, as Torje was mentioning. The spillover effects of redundant records are tremendous. So when you start realizing how everything is designed around containing that problem, you realize that intrinsic reconciliation, which is what you get with triple entry accounting, is fantastic, really. So the two main contributions are a reliable record and that it's shared. Those two things together, they change a lot.
So then that begs the question, would a semi-centralized, you mentioned the central bank as being that third party, does a blockchain such as BSV give any kind of practical advantage in the real world versus using that other party, or what do we have there?
Well, I think if you're in the regulated world, you're more or less forced to use the regulator as your guidance at least, and they would probably lead the process for setting up a trusted third party. You could use a blockchain under supervision of the regulator, but then I think you would probably be steered towards a private blockchain, and you would get rid of the miners, which you can probably do because at that level, all of the players are trusted to some extent, and they can play the game much more efficiently. Blockchain becomes much more useful where you're not in a regulated space, but you still want to trade with people, and you want to preserve the sense of open entry, but you're stuck with the fact that your counterparty is adversarial. And so consequently, blockchain becomes critical when you move across borders, because your regulator's no longer protecting your back. They stop at the border. And you want to deal with your counterparty in another country where they have different laws and different customs. They might not even have laws. Or the laws might be ignored totally. So you need that sense of blockchain to try and to resolve and control the adversarial process so you can get that record created such that everybody is guided along that path. And you can therefore be comfortable doing the next trade and the next trade and the next trade.
I've often said that there's a lot of money to be made by turning gray markets into white markets, and it sounds like there could be an example there of that international trade using a blockchain showing how much efficiency there is there, and then perhaps that's a good place for the industry to start, which brings up Addendum. You're a Norwegian company, as I understand it, working with presumably some foreign entities and things, and is that a spot that you're looking at from a business development standpoint as a starting spot, or what does that look like?
So right now we are focusing on the Norwegian market. The good thing with that is it has really digitalized a lot of the processes and electronic invoicing and these kind of standards that we can actually build upon and use to make the system efficient. So, but for foreign transactions, invoice frauds are a very important thing to look into there.
I have to ask, when do we pop out the champagne and say, hey, we've revolutionized accounting and fully adopted the best system?
I think it's after I'm dead.
Well, I hope not.
It's going to take a long time to shift these players.
I think it was about 500 years for adoption on double entry accounting, as I understand it.
Well, it ruled for 500 or more years, but it did take something like 170 years before we even got to the first textbook. And that Pacchioli textbook was actually I think it was like the second book that went through the Gutenberg press.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it was very early edition, and it was enabled by the Gutenberg press. He couldn't have done it without that.
So, well, innovation stacking on top of each other.
Yeah.
Any closing words, gentlemen?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of interesting synergies, and especially to mention Unisat and supply chain solutions combined with the more accounting systems is extremely interesting. And in the audit, when you're studying audit, seeing that doing analysis on non-financial data, which is what you can get from supply chain, makes the audits really, really much better. So,
absolutely. Closing thoughts, Juan?
Well, I would like to say one other thing about what Ian has done. So congratulations, Ian, because your impact has been huge. So building a bookkeeping record out of receipts, that's a huge contribution, because you can then read your accounting. You can read the books. You can read the receipts to get your books. And you can drill down to the most basic level from the most aggregate level. Bringing all that together, that's also a huge contribution. So I now look forward to the further diffusion of this, because the impact can be tremendous. I think that there's been a lot of actors playing in the triple entry accounting field. They don't know each other, so there's a lot of convergence, there's a lot of synergy that can be achieved. And yeah, I'm just very hopeful about the future.
Wonderful. Anything in closing, Ian?
My final word would be, I'm not in this game anymore. It's over to the young guys.
Well, thank you for everything you've given us.